going to be beyond 21.9. We are rethinking the meeting room, people, because we are in the wild, wild west of meeting room collaboration. And I have two guys who are going to kind of help me weed through this and figure this out. So we have Caleb Salamans of HOK and Sam Kennedy of NetSpeak. What's going on, you guys?
Thank you for having us. Happy to be here.
Of course.
Hi. Yeah, happy to be here too.
I'm excited to talk to you both because you guys both have a lot of experience in the meeting room industry, but you kind of come at it from different points. So, first of all, why don't you both just talk a little bit about yourselves and your kind of like journey getting to where you are today? Sam, do you want to start?
Sure, I'll start. So hello, everyone. Again, my name is Sam Kennedy. I currently run the go-to-market side of the business for a startup company called NetSpeak, NETSPEEK. We're building a software platform called Lena that's bringing generative AI to support the admin side of conference rooms and technology spaces. But my journey here, I've been in the UCAV industries for almost 30 years, spent 17 years at Polycom and Poly, and 3 years at Crestron.
Very cool. Caleb, what about you?
Yeah, I'm Caleb Solomons. I'm actually based out of one of HOK's 26 design and architecture offices in Calgary, Canada. I've been with HOK for probably about 7 years, before that with a smaller architecture and design firm. And I think I approach this conversation from the side of architecture, design, sort of the humans that are using the space, and all those kind of equations that go into that side of the boardroom.
I'm excited. This is because you guys are both going to have such good thoughts about this. And these are just questions that are like, I'm curious to know. And I know our audience is too. So let's kind of start by talking about how we have seen meeting room design completely evolve over the last few years, almost at an alarming rate. What design habits or technologies do you think are kind of helping that? And what do you think is kind of holding us back a little bit? Caleb, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think definitely, like you said, it's growing, exploding, changing in many different ways. It's interesting that COVID and the pandemic really sort of accelerated many of those things and forced companies to adopt different types of strategies around remote work and hybrid work and how to collaborate when people aren't sitting in the same space. And I think that's where it kind of started, right? Where the conversation changed around what a meeting room is. And it was largely driven by this new adapted version of meeting that people became very familiar with. I think in many ways, though the requirements have changed or the desires have changed, the technology hasn't. And I think that's where we run into a lot of friction. People jump into a boardroom expecting it to do something, but it doesn't work that way anymore, or it doesn't, I guess, never work that way. It doesn't work for the new evolution of how people collaborate. And I think that's really interesting to consider. I think one other thought that popped into my head as you asked that question too is that when we look at how technology has changed and evolved over time, it's often enhanced how people connect and enhanced how people collaborate. So changing from a phone call to a Skype or video call instead, or even changing from color or black and white TV to color TV, it reinforced and added and strengthened the connection that we have. I think one of the things we're grappling with the meeting room is that although the technology's improving, it's not necessarily improving that connection. And in many ways, it's almost like degrading that connection, because yes, everybody's visible on screen, but traditionally they would just be in the room with you. So it's almost a reversal of that connection, even though the technology is expanding. So it's interesting. It's interesting to think about.
You're the guy we're trying to solve for. But for my take on this, it is interesting I think COVID had a huge impact, but the world was about how do I enable as many small spaces as I can. Huddle spaces was such the hot thing, but going into COVID, then we had COVID, then it was a lot of how do I enable as many large spaces because no one wanted to be near each other. There was only a lot of people in the office when they're in the office. And now it almost feels like it's gone full circle. And now it's how do I enable as many spaces as I possibly can, as cost effective as I can, because we're still in this, the Wednesday is the day that everybody's in the office, and there's going to be remote people no matter how we look at it, and how do I deliver the best experience possible, so that people can just walk in the room, act naturally, be able to collaborate and communicate very easily and effectively, with anyone at any one time. So I think, some of the big things that I continue to hear is how do I enable as many spaces with technology as I possibly can, but I need to do it as simple as possible. Again, if I think, 10 years ago, I could think of quite a few customers that had white glove services, that had dedicated people, that was their life. That was literally their job, to walk in and press and make sure everything was good to go. And how far we've come since then, when you just don't hear about that much anymore, and that the users now have they feel empowered enough to be able to walk into the room and join a call. And I think the where we've been successful is driving simplicity as much as we can, cost effectiveness and simplicity. Well, while we're not there, and I think that there's a huge way to go, I think that those have absolutely helped us get to the scale that we're in now. It is ubiquitous today. Again, it's not the experience like we're being in the same room, at least not yet.
Yeah.
We're getting really close, and I think that this move towards simplicity has really, I think the platform players have a lot to say about that. I think Microsoft, Zoom, Cisco, Google, they've done a really great job, but the hardware manufacturers have come along there and driving simplicity, and that's gotten us to where we are.
Yeah. Oh, really good points from both of you. And one of the trends, and like how I gave this session its name, is because for a few years we thought that like 21:9, just like changing the aspect ratio of the display at the front of the room, was really gonna like turn it all around for us. And it kind of hasn't, you know? And I don't get me wrong, I think Microsoft Teams front row is a beautiful solution. I do. But I don't think it's like the end all be all, because at the end of the day, you're still putting people's faces on like the same screen where like the content is supposed to be. And I think that just like makes things difficult for people who are in person now, even maybe more so than the people joining from afar. So what limitations are you guys, I mean, like you kind of talked about this, but what limitations are we still kind of seeing in the meeting room? And is there an end all be all beautiful solution that's going to come and save us?
Yeah, I'll start maybe.
Go ahead, Sam.
I think but one of the things that I really liked about 21:9 when it first came in, when it first became kind of the hot thing, was it added that little bit of extra space in the meeting room that allowed for chat. And I'm one of those kind of people, as you can imagine, that I like to talk a lot in meetings. I like to scream a lot in meetings, and so I'm gonna take over meetings, and you surround me with a bunch of people like me, right? We're gonna take over, and there are certain people who like to communicate. They're gonna just chat in the meeting. That's the way they're gonna communicate. And so one of the things that I think 21:9, I think part of the reason we got here with 21:9 was because by bringing chat into the meeting room, it brought this level of equity that we're all kind of searching for. And so I think the promise of that, and I think for those rooms where you need that level of capability, I think it's huge, and I think it's a real big differentiator. But I'm with you. I don't think that 21:9 on its own has changed the world. You don't see 21:9 all sizes from all manufacturers. I don't think it solves all use cases. I think there are specific rooms. Like, again, I think even Microsoft is very upfront that they don't see front row being all things for all rooms. Again, I go back to simple, consistency, right? The more you can make it's what I've worked for years, and I've been a guy trying to show as much innovation as possible. Like no one, as much as anyone in the industry, I've been trying to show as much innovation. But the things I always hear from customers is just make it work, just so that I can go in the room, simple, and that people, that anybody who uses these rooms feels comfortable to walk into any room, to talk to anyone, and have a great experience 100% of the time. I think that's the bar that everyone's looking for. And whatever technologies are going to enable that, that's what needs to come to the forefront.
Yeah, a couple thoughts, Sam. I like what you mentioned about the chat, right? And I think that's a great example of how shifting to virtual meetings taught us new things about how people like to interact with each other. And I think that's the 21x9 or other solutions that do the same are starting to help and solve for these new things that we learned about that we now want in the physical space because they work so well in the digital space. I think another example is the ability for people to go off camera or sort of fade into the background a little bit. So we're seeing a lot of changes in terms of how boardrooms and meeting rooms are set up to allow for that to happen as well, right? For there to be more of an observer seat in a room rather than the people active and engaged at a table. In terms of all or end all be all solution, yeah, I don't think we're there yet. I think HOK, we are a global architecture and design firm. We've been trying to look at what the implications might be or how to start to solve this. And a couple of years ago, we had a team come together, kind of inspired or sparked by a book written by David Pearl called Will There Be Donuts? And in the book, he kind of talks about that there's essentially 7 different types of meetings, and that the boardroom with as many chairs as possible, the biggest table as possible, one screen at the far end of the room doesn't necessarily work for all of those different types of meetings. So we started looking at that and started kind of diving into that topic and to see what would come out of it. And it was interesting. And I think one of the first things we identified is that, yes, to Sam's point, there's a need for the meat and potatoes, basic, up and running meeting space that everybody can jump into with no barrier to entry. Hopefully you don't even have to book it. You just jump in, connect your device, you're up and running, no problem. In that case, the technology needs to be as simple, cost-effective as possible. I think what we have learned, though, is that you need to complement that with a set of other additional rooms that start to address those other specialized types of meetings. So imagine a scenario where you're not booking a meeting room based on the number of chairs you need, but instead what your intended result from that meeting is. So you look and say, okay, I need to book a room. I'm doing a sales pitch. And that a room gets presented to you that's dialed in and set up for that. Or I'm hosting a one-on-one coaching scenario, and a room gets assigned to you based on what you need for that. And I think you need a bit of both. And I don't think you can have full-on technology in every meeting room. That's just not practical. It's not feasible. It's not going to work for people. They won't know how to use it. But it needs to be widespread enough that it addresses those things that Sam's mentioning. So I think this sort of complementary set of 2 different types of meeting rooms, the generics and then a handful of specialized, is working quite well.
Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. Right? Again, if you're going to teach a class, you don't go into a board. I mean, typically you're not going to go into a boardroom, right? You want to go to a classroom. If I'm going to teach someone, about operating on someone, I'm going to go and do it in a proper. So I absolutely agree. And again, I think it's this cyclical. Like if we go back 10, 15 years, you used to have immersive telepresence rooms, and it's it's even coming right. Google and HP, right? They have their new device that's dedicated to that. So I absolutely, you need the right tool for the right job, and you're right. It's not one. There isn't one meeting room that solves all use cases, and aligning the right room types with those use cases. Those are the companies that are successful. So I couldn't agree more with what you're saying.
And I think when you look at those use cases and the different styles or different ways that people meet, they're all on a spectrum. And some of those meeting spaces require technology and are enhanced by technology. Some of those meeting spaces suffer when that's forced. So I think we're even, trying to look at technology integration and across those different types of spaces and deciding, what is the investment in technology? Maybe this room has no technology. Maybe that's not the point. If you're trying to come up with a democratic decision, maybe you need to forego that technology, have people sit at a round table and just have face-to-face conversation. So I think that's an interesting kind of layer in this as well, that some spaces just don't need any tech as well.
That I love what you both brought up, because it brought up the question that I was literally thinking. It seems like we are kind of on 2 different mountains here, and the one is we're going back to the telepresence stuff from 10 years ago, where Google Project Starlight, I think it is, and then Logitech's Project Ghost, where like we're going back to telepresence times of like we're paying so much money, but how much use is that getting? How worth it is it to like build this huge system when chances are like is everyone going to be using it like that? Do we really need all that? So on one hand it feels like we are like over technologying the rooms, and then on the other hand it seems like people are like no, just take everything out. We don't need all of that. So I was wondering like what you guys are actually seeing out there in the world. Are you seeing both of those two trends happening simultaneously, and like what do you think is going to come from that? I feel like that was like so much that I packed into one question. Sorry.
I've seen it. I don't think this is that new of a trend of over engineer. I think over engineering rooms has actually held back our industry for a long time, of too much technology being put into the room where I need an engineer to support it. I think the end customers are becoming much more educated today. And so, again, I think, to Caleb's point is putting the right amount of technology in the room and so therefore you need to understand how people are going to use your rooms and enable them to be able to choose the right meeting room and for the meeting types that they're going to be have. So again, I think you need to understand your users, but I do think no, I don't believe we're going to go back to the days of telepresence. But there's going to be, so I think there will be some dedicated rooms that are very nichey, unique. At least that's my take on those types of products. I think that they're really cool and people will want to use them. And I do think there are some use cases that those products solve for, but they don't solve the mass, right? Because what I hear from customers is they have a limited amount of real estate. They have a limited amount of rooms. I'm proximity only close to so many rooms. So therefore, there's the ones that I'm going to use, and I need to give them as much capabilities in those spaces that they're ultimately going to use, because otherwise people are just going to sit at their desks.
Yeah.
They're not even going to go to the office. So I think balance is, if you're taking away anything, I think it's balance is, those that are successful, when customers are touring me around their offices, that's what they're showing me, balance, right? That they have a good mixture of lots of different types of meeting spaces.
Yeah, I think another thing, kind of too, a thought that came to mind is around technology maturing to the point where it's enough, right? We don't need it to do more. And I think for a long time there was a lot of clients that would, get terrified at the idea of a telepresence space, because what happens in 2 years when the TV doesn't work anymore, or clients worried about putting a display in a boardroom and building it in nicely because that display is going to grow in 2 years. And I think we're getting to a point where we're reaching a maturity with technology that we know what it needs to be, we know how to design for it and accommodate it, and I think that's helping the conversation as well.
Yeah, 100%. I was wondering, like, yes, so we've talked about like, are we putting enough or too much technology into a room? But let's kind of talk about like the configuration of the technology once it's in the room. Does the display configuration and does the room layout play like a huge part in creating true meeting equity? Sorry, buzzword alert. For both in-person and remote participants, and how much of a part does that actually play?
Yeah, I think depends on what you want to get from the meeting, like we talked about earlier. We're seeing absolutely that conversation coming up in a big way with clients, where if we look at the intended use of a meeting room, it's not just going to inform the technology, it's going to inform the table shape and size. It's going to inform the posture. Are you seated? Are you standing? Are you perching? It's going to inform the tools and the props that you have in the room to facilitate that conversation, whether it's a whiteboard or other tools and resources like that. So absolutely, rooms are changing and shaping. I think to our earlier point, there's probably a place for some of the basic, simple, just get it right. Don't fuss around too much with it. Give me a table, a room, TV, call it a day, complemented with some of these other spaces that are more specialized. We see, huge, I think, differences now more than ever before in terms of product offering, meant to kind of shake up the feel, for sure.
I'm going to use my own buzzword here. I needed to do it at some point, but I think automation is going to have. I think automation has had a big play in in our spaces. I think it's going to have an even more impact on our spaces as AI becomes more prevalent, as it becomes more intelligent, and understands. Like, right now we see AI in a lot of at a personal level as it relates to the spaces. But Steph, I've been on your show before. I've been talking to you about things that we're focusing on is to how do we build intelligence to help people when they're in the rooms, to give them a seamless experience so they don't have to worry about how do I get here? How do I do these things? The system should be automatically intelligent enough to be able to already know what I'm going to need to know before I need to know it on how to use these products. So, as the products become more simple to deploy, as they become more cost effective, and as we continue to, as an industry, not only what we're doing, but as an industry, drive in more automation and more AI capabilities to assist the end users, adoption will continue to grow. Because if it's just simple and all I have to do is walk in the room, just as if the two of us were meeting together, and I can get as good an experience or even better experience than I traditionally would have had, then I'm going to use it more. And so I think our industry needs to evolve. And again, vendors like me, we're really trying to push the envelope of what's possible. And I think a lot of it ties to what is in automation. Again, automation to me is going to be one of the big things we're going to see here over the next few years.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Steph, just going back to your comment on digital equity or virtual equity, I think it's a difficult thing to solve for because you only have control of one end of that handshake, right? And I think too often we're seeing, or maybe not too often, but we're often seeing struggles with the experience being what people hope it will, because somebody's working at home in their living room and they don't have the right lighting, they don't have the right audio, or they don't have the ability to sketch something by hand and have the other person see it on the whiteboard that's in their room. So there's still limitations around the effectiveness of that virtual communication. And I don't know if we'll ever get there from an equity perspective, because there's always going to be a disadvantage or an imbalance between people, unless it truly is like back to the telepresence days where it's the exact same lighting, et cetera. But that doesn't seem aligned with the reality and needs of how people are using technology now.
But we're seeing innovations there. I mean, I think we continue to see, I suspect when we go to InfoComm this year, there's going to be even more. I think every trade show we go to, we see the industry does make some progress around that. I agree. I think it's a goal. I don't know that it's a destination of equity, but it's this need to get there is spurring innovation, right? Yeah. You think, multi-cameras 4 or 5 years ago, I mean, maybe, 6, 7 years ago, there was really none of that, right? I needed dedicated people to do this. Today, right? How many vendors have center of the table camera, or how many Zoom? They've been adding some really amazing multi-camera where they just bring in you want another camera room, or just bring in another Zoom room. I mean, it is really driving a lot of innovation in the industry to deliver on meeting equity. I mean, the vendors are hearing. I think it's a way that they see themselves as differentiating. And I think we'll continue to see that, right? Again, I go back to, as price points continue to go down, as it's become simpler to deploy, we'll see more and more of these types of innovations, because it does impact. Again, it may impact the users it may feel very incremental, but so shavings make a pile, right? Each time it becomes a little bit more incremental. I mean, again, how long ago was it that, how many calls are all of us on where noise blocking is just not a thing anymore, right? We're on a call with someone and they're like, sorry for that noise, and you don't hear any noise, right? And, it was pre-COVID that we all heard noise, right? And so it just, these innovations are happening, and it doesn't, they happen, and we don't necessarily realize that they're happening. And so again, if I look back over the last 5-10 years, we've gone We've done amazing things. And like I said, I expect, again, what are we, 6 weeks away from InfoComm? I'm expecting to see even more innovations there. So I think meeting equity is still top of mind for the vendors, and it should be. It absolutely, again, it's a goal, not a destination, as I see it.
A goal, not a destination. I actually really like that. And Sam, you did the same thing where you brought up what my next question was going to be. I think we're definitely on the same wavelength today. I wanted you to talk about AI in the meeting room because right now, I think like most prevalently, we're talking about like AI when it comes to, yes, being built in our ceiling tile microphones to help with noise suppression, or, you know, having a lot of like audio filters built in, but also camera tracking, presenter tracking. But what you're doing at NetSpeak is like so much more beyond that. So I was wondering like where you're seeing that deliver value in terms of, yes, automation, personalization, and finally smarter collaboration at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's I'm having a lot of fun here at the, we're just a new startup. We launched our company at ISC. We're gonna have a big showing here at InfoComm in a few weeks, and how we see the work. We're trying to disrupt the space and bring in a level. While, like you said, AI up till now within our industry has really been focused on the areas like you talked about, Copilot, multi-camera, noise blocking, and we think that there's a lot of value that AI can bring at a completely different angle. And it goes back to kind of where my head has been this whole time, and where just my head has been over the last 10 years and 20 years. What I've heard from customers is, how do we keep the rooms up and how do we give everyone that confidence that the technology is always going to work 100% of the time, right? That's where it needs to be. It needs to be so that, again, you could twist my arm and say there are rooms that don't need technology. I can respect that, but at the same time, I can't. Like, in my head, I can't live with that, right? I want to put I want to enable as many rooms with as much technology as it possibly can be, because I think that technology in many cases can deliver ultimately a better experience. And I think what we're trying to do is build the tools that are going to be able to enable people to roll these products out faster, lower cost, be able to keep the rooms up and running at a much higher percentage, and leverage generative AI to do a level of reporting, keeping you up to date. Was there a change in the market? Was there a change in your environment? Virtualizing and automating a lot of the support of these spaces, we think is one of the things that AI is really made for. And so we're trying to be one of or the first vendor in market to build out a tool to support all of these spaces to scale, so that you can roll this out in a way that you could have never done in the past. Typically what I hear from organizations is that they're continuing to grow the amount of spaces, but they're not growing the support staff, and the support staff, like AV teams, have now moved into generalized IT. So generalized IT has to support many, many more spaces. And again, to Kayla's point, some more complicated spaces like training rooms and boardrooms, and then more traditional spaces. How do they support all of these ever-growing spaces with a higher expectation? You need new tools to do this, and that's what I think that we're doing is delivering a set of automated tools, generative AI tools to assist the actual human beings actually who are tasked with keeping these rooms up and running and driving innovations and all that. So come on, info come have some hopefully blow everyone away with what we're going to show.
I think we lost you in like the last 10 seconds of what you
I
said.
was just saying, you just see a second and I'm going to blow everyone away.
Caleb,
yeah, I'll jump in for a minute.
Yeah,
we're
go
still
ahead.
losing you a little bit, Sam. I think everything Sam is saying makes a lot of sense for adoption and like really strong use of meeting spaces. I think we see a lot of resistance from IT and workplace support teams around technology from a long-term servicing perspective. How is the team that's managing the space really going to keep up with all those devices? And I think if AI can help in that realm, amazing. I think if AI can also help get people up out of their chairs, out of their desks, and into a meeting space or into an appropriate spot for virtual collaboration, that's good too. I think we see across the board and kind of all sectors this new trend of people sitting at their desks, taking everything, all the meetings from their desk, despite being 5 steps away from a meeting room, or not leveraging the spaces that are available and specifically designed to support collaboration. And I think, the other thing that comes to mind for me is there's so many other things that we as architects and designers have to solve spatially in order for that technology to work. So it's, we're dealing with acoustics and acoustic isolation. We're dealing with how to get the boardrooms sized right so that it's comfortable if you're in there with 2 people, but comfortable with 10. And there's all these other challenges. And, acoustics is one that has just exploded in recent years because there's so much noise in the office, and video conferencing tends to be louder than normal conversations. So there's a much greater need for acoustics. And it's difficult because acoustic control and acoustic isolation isn't visible. It's all hidden away, and it costs insane amounts of money, and it's hard for clients to figure out how to spend and how to justify that spend as well. So there's lots of challenges related to it.
No, absolutely. I was wondering, Caleb, if you could also share like a real world example, if you could, either from a project or something you've advised on where like an alternative meeting room design or something really immersive, like really, really paid off for the space.
Interesting. Yeah. I'm trying to think of a good example.
Sorry, I'm really putting you on the spot with that one.
No, I think I'm like, my head's going in two directions, which isn't helping me. I think there's cases where it's a different format or a different kind of arrangement of furniture, but it's really done in like a good way. Like it's simple, it's useful, and people can adapt and use the space as needed. So it's really like fungible and low cost and low effort. I think those kind of spaces are really working well. And I'm trying to think of a good example of like a high tech or something at the other end of the spectrum. Maybe come back to me on that.
Okay, no worries. Sam, I'll look to you. If you could design like 1 or 2 perfect meeting rooms, because I know we talked about like how it would be good if we had 1 room, no technology, 1 room with all the technology. But if you could, like money's no object, think of 1 or 2 perfect meeting spaces. What would those look like to you?
Well, some of the rooms that I've particularly liked is, I'm very high on the meeting equity. So having multiple cameras in the room, multiple monitors in the room, I find it very comfortable in the room when I can see the far end just as easily as I can as people in the room. I know it's a pretty polarizing product, but I was involved with Centro back in the day, and I think it was just before its time. But we brought the cameras and the monitors to the middle of the room, and so that the far end was always within line of sight. Now there was things wrong with the product; it was too expensive, et cetera. But what it solved for, I think, was valid then and is valid now. So to me, I think what I like is multiple cameras around the room so that I can just act naturally, look around. The cameras, I can always be confident that the far end's going to see me in my best light, and that I could always see the far end, and I can see everyone else in the room. There's value in like a front row style where everyone's facing, but I don't know that I find that necessarily natural, right? Like I'm looking at all of you right now. I want to be able to look at the people I'm in the room with. So to me, it's that I like lots of cameras in the room, lots of monitors in the room, and be able to act as natural. But as long as the technology is just hidden away, it can't hit you over the head. So you have to find that balance of technology, but in a way that feels very natural. Again, if I was to have 2 rooms, I would have one that's like that with lots of monitors, and then just simple rooms that I can scale. I mean, those are the 2 types of rooms that I think are the most effective for most organizations.
Caleb, I'm going to ask you the same question. If you could have 1 or 2 rooms that you think by your own standard and definition are perfect, what would they be?
What would they be? Oh, good question. I think it very much depends on, like, it sound like a broken record, but it very much depends on what the intended result is. And
yeah,
I've recently seen beautiful boardroom that had just sort of like the right amount of technology, I would say. Like the audio was crisp, the acoustics were controlled, there was a couple displays in the room, so you could have access to digital content quite easily. There was, I think in this case, 2 cameras in the room, And they didn't jump around too much, which in a way was nice because it wasn't too distracting. And I think as I'm explaining this, realizing like there was more simple than needed, but it wasn't the technology necessarily, in my perspective, that made it a great room. It was all of the things that went into that or into the overall experience. So it was well appointed in terms of furniture. There were hospitality elements like food and beverages and things like that available, but all carefully thought through and carefully constructed in a way that it was a very sophisticated experience. It wasn't, a bunch of donuts thrown in the corner of the room. It was intentional and thought through, and it felt like the space was truly dialed in for the intended result. And in this case, the intended result was soft selling. It's like bringing people in, letting them see kind of how the company operated, let them see the level of sophistication they operate at. And I think it was just like the seamlessness of it and how carefully everything was thought through that made it the best space.
Yeah, love that.
I think again, it's fun to pair up with you on this because I think we complement. I think because there is the perfect rooms are a combination of all of those things, right? It's not just the technology, it's not just the furniture, it's a combination of all of these things that make. And those companies that I talk to, that tour me around, they love to tour me around all of their facilities. I think that's one of the things, the ones that I see are the most successful are the ones who get that, right? Where they have their teams are all community. It's not one decision maker who makes the decisions on all of them. It's these group of people who are working together. They understand their users and they're bringing all of it. It's not just one thing. And they're not this ubiquitous, the technology is an afterthought, right?
Yeah.
It's they're all working collectively together from the ground up. Those organizations are the ones who are the most successful.
Yeah. Well, I think that I know we are about out of time, and I think that's like kind of a good place to leave it, like naturally.
Yeah.
So, okay, last thing I'm going to ask you both is where can people connect with you after this? You all have both had really great perspective, great things to say. So I know that our audience are probably going to want to connect with you after this. Caleb, why don't you go first?
Yeah, LinkedIn's probably the best spot. You can reach me there, or my contact information is also available through hok.com.
Perfect. Sam?
Again, LinkedIn as well. So Sam Kennedy at LinkedIn. And I'd go check out our website. It's pretty basic at the moment, but NetSpeak with 2 E's. And definitely come schedule some time with us at Infocom. We think we're gonna have a big show, and they're gonna show some really cool innovations. So again, appreciate the time today.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for your time. It has been an absolute pleasure just getting to pick your brains for the past 30, 40 minutes. So thank you both so much.